When I was younger, I had the opportunity to visit Washington, D.C. And while we have pictures of that event, I don't remember a lot about it, except for one part. While we were in Washington, we had this chance to visit the Air and Space Museum. And in the museum, there's all sorts of planes all throughout history. If you went today, you'd see the Spirit of St. Louis. There's a Stealth Blackbird, a Concorde, and even a space shuttle there. But there was this one plane that stood out to me more than any of the others. And I think it might have been because it looked like a bullet more than an airplane. And that plane was called the X-1. The X-1 was the plane that Chuck Yeager first broke the sound barrier in. And as we were standing there looking at this plane, I remembered a guide telling a story about that historic event that happened on October the 14th, 1947. Evidently, for a long time, there were people who thought that man could never break the sound barrier or travel faster than the speed of sound. They believed once you got close to the sound barrier, there would be forces acting upon your plane that would just tear it apart, and man was just not meant to fly that fast. Now, people had tried this before, and they would get really close to that barrier, and they would get right up to the threshold, and the plane would start shaking, and the people flying would have to make a choice. They could either press on, or they could back off and flee to safety. A few had tried, and they had all made it to that point, but they had backed off until that day. While he was flying his X-1, Chuck, like all the others before him, came to the point that everything seemed to be falling apart on the aircraft. And he had to make the choice that the others made before him. Would he stop and go back to safety, or would he press on? Now, of course, we know the outcome. He pressed on, breaking the sound barrier and being an example to those who would come after him. While I was thinking about this story recently, I wondered if this was how Paul felt. I wondered if in his life it seemed like everything was starting to rattle and fall apart around him, and maybe he was thinking or even faced those same choices, to either quit or keep pressing on. I mean, he had been beaten multiple times. He'd been stoned. He had been shipwrecked multiple times. He had stayed out at sea for one day and one night, and now he was imprisoned. Surely he was struggling with this, right? But listen to the choice that he made as he lays it out in the book of Philippians. It's in chapter 3. He says this, "I don't mean to say that I've already achieved these things or that I've already reached perfection, but I press on to possess perfection for which Jesus Christ first possessed me. No, dear brothers and sisters, I have not achieved it, but I have focused on the one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race, to receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us." Paul pressed on. Chuck didn't turn back, and he pressed on, and we're still talking about him today. Paul pressed on, and we're still talking about him today for the glory of God. But what about you? Do you ever feel like those pilots felt right before their breakthrough? Do you feel like everything in your life is shaking and it feels like it's all ready to fall apart? Can I encourage you to be like Paul and press on? I know that giving up seems to be easy, but giving up is always the easiest choice. But what will happen when you press on? How will God use you for His glory if you just fix your eyes on Him and press on toward the goal? You'll never know if you quit. But press on, keep your focus on God. Keep your eyes focused on the eternal things, and God will use you for great and mighty things. Yes, times seem hard and they seem heavy, and yes, it seems like quitting is the answer. But remember what else Paul said, that despite all these hardships, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Focus on Him and see what He will do for you.